Florida today, and we are really excited to be here to talk about TEDx in the classroom and all that can mean. And I'm Dr. Cristina James. I'm the academic dean in the middle school, and I'm an English teacher and our TEDx organizer. And I would like my students to introduce themselves now.
Hi, I'm Michelle Pfeiffer. I'm in 9th grade. I'm just going to be putting this paper up. Please tweet us out. We're hashtag number 4.
Okay, and we've got a slide for that as well. Go ahead.
I'm Sophia Liveris. I'm in 8th grade.
I'm Crystal. I'm in 9th grade.
So we are very happy to be here. If you go to, from our first slide, sorry, we have our social media, which is at Souls DNA, Instagram, Soul Stories DNA, and our website, soulstoriesdna.com. Anyway, if you go to our second slide, then that is the hashtag for us. We are hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering number 4, and we hope that you will tweet out to us today and ask us questions, because my students can tell you all about this in more eloquent ways than I can. So at the beginning of the year in my middle school English class, probably 2 or 3 years ago, one of my students asked me what we were going to do in school that year. And he just asked me so quickly the first day, and it was such an imminent question that he said, what are we going to do in English? And I said, I had to think fast. So I said, I think what we're going to do this year is learn to be Scooby Doo. So if you go to my first slide, I have a little, not a Scooby Doo that will violate copyright, but somebody who dressed up like Scooby Doo. And what I meant by this was that I wanted to create a kind of pedagogy in my classroom where students would respond to a really out-of-the-box curriculum by doing that kind of double take that Scooby and Shaggy do whenever they see a ghost. And now I'm going to totally embarrass my students and do that. It's when they go, "Arr!" And that's what I want my students to do. See, they're kind of doing it right now. And so the other thing that I thought about this was that I didn't just want my students to feel like Scooby-Doo. I wanted them to feel like our whole classroom was a Scooby-Doo episode. So if you look at our next slide, I wanted them to feel, I wanted them to feel like they were riding in that mystery machine every day, that turquoise and chartreuse panel van, and that the ride they took inside it each day would lead to a new mystery to solve. One where inference, deduction, extemporaneous thinking, and teamwork were all required. And so I got to thinking how we could do this. And before we go into how we do it, I want to talk about someone who I think you all know on Twitter and who I just love and I follow, and I'm, love her to death. Her name is Trisha Abarvia. And the next slide is dedicated to her because she articulated very eloquently what I was feeling about Scooby-Doo and my students. She said, we need to stop preparing our students for the world as it is and start preparing them for the world as they and we want it to be. And to this end, education must be aspirational and schooling disruptive. And that is when I started searching for something that could heed her high standards. And what I found was a few years ago, I went to a conference at the Pine School in Fort Lauderdale and met the brilliant educator, Aaron Gallego, who was doing TEDx in the classroom with his AP seniors and putting on an event and speaking at it. And I said, we've got to do this at the Benjamin School with middle schoolers. So if you go to the next slide, what I have is, that's our logo from last year. And that's kind of nice because behind us, you can see both logos from our past 2 years. And before we start talking about this, believe me, there are still some people out there who are not totally sure what TED is and how it delineates from TEDx. So for those of you who don't know, TED is an acronym. It stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And it started in the 80s as kind of a think tank cool conference in Northern California. And then as the internet gained precedence, so too did TED. And when Chris Anderson took over as its curator in the early 2000s, it really went crazy. TED Talks are, so TED is a non-global platform. It's devoted to disseminating ideas worth spreading. And this is usually in the form of short, succinct talks that are no longer than 18 minutes. And what TEDx is that X means that you can apply to TED. It's a super easy process, and they will give you a license to do your own TED event, which is independently organized and licensed, but you do it in your community or at your school. And I have to say that for my students and me, the appendage of that one little letter to the TED acronym has really brought the X factor to our learning in the most disruptive, aspirational, and transformative of ways. So if you go to the next slide, and believe me, my students here will attest that I really love To Kill a Mockingbird. I love to teach them all about critical writing. I love to make them re-edit their work. But there is something about bringing this TEDx curriculum in the year where you say, hey, and it's going to make them go, oh, because what you're going to do is say, hey, you are not going to write another essay on To Kill a Mockingbird that we're going to edit and re-edit. And that's my little picture there. And then next to it, I found, and you're also not going to make another paper mache diorama of something for a project. And believe it or not, on that slide, I actually found a picture of a paper mache Atticus. So instead, you are going to get to do something that many people can't do. You are going to learn, and if this is on my next slide, my students are going to learn to get really quiet. They're going to learn to get really mindful. They're going to learn how to go to a place inside themselves where they can filter out all that white noise and sound bites and fake news to which this world subjects them. And once they are going to learn to exhume, mine and exhume their own soul stories, which then become their ideas worth spreading, that they disseminate on the TEDx stage at an event of their own construction and making. So there is absolutely no doubt that this is a Scooby Doo curriculum. It will absolutely disrupt your classroom in ways you cannot imagine. But as teachers, you should not worry about that, because the aspiration that is intrinsic to doing this is just guaranteed. So the first thing that we would like to talk about today, and I'm going to let my students talk about, is in the next slide. And it is about digital footprint. And I think my students here today can attest to the fact that they have been to many, many assemblies where they have been told about their negative digital footprint and what they post on Instagram and, you know, can change their lives. But we don't talk a lot about a positive digital footprint. And, you know, one thing that I just want to say is when they really get the idea that they're going to go on the stage at their own TEDx event and take a global platform that they're going to share with people like Amanda Palmer and Al Gore and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, that's one part of a positive digital footprint. But I want them to talk to you now about ways in which they feel that going through this process, because all of these people are our TEDxers, and all of these people have given TED Talks. So please talk about your positive digital footprints.
Well, I did 2 TED Talks. I did one in 7th grade about being trilingual, and I did one in 8th grade about my name being Michelle Pfeiffer. I think that from these 2 TED Talks, I've seen the growth that I had from 7th to 8th grade and how much better I got at public speaking. And I think that being in, like, doing TED Talks has helped me a lot. So yeah.
After all the talks were done at the event, Dr. James submitted them to National Speaking Week's competition for Best Video or Podcast, and mine actually came in first place, which was amazing because now when you Google my name, you see my talk and the article about my work.
Yeah, my positive digital footprint was from my talk because people came up to me like Publix or at church, and they all like knew who I was, and they're like, oh, we watched your TED Talk, and it was just like cool that they saw a part of me that was posted from doing a school event that you wouldn't usually see. So.
Good, and we're going to talk more about positive digital footprint and later in our presentation, but just imagine the difference between sending in an essay when you're applying for a high school or college internship, or sending in an essay for college and being able to submit a digital portfolio of your TED Talks and the growth you've made sequentially over the years. It's a big difference. So the first thing we're going to do before we really talk about snapshots of lessons we do during the year to make this all happen is talk about the difference between being a TEDx organizer when you're doing an event with adults and being a TEDx organizer, as I am at the Benjamin School, when you are working with students and what we call our Soul Stories DNA curriculum. So when you are a TEDx organizer for adults, you've got a lot to do. You've got a lot of moving parts. You've got to look for a venue. You have got to do publicity. You've got to curate your social media. You've got to find sponsors. You've got to think of innovative things for your audience to do. You've got tons to do. But your team is probably mostly made up of adults. And those adults, even if you've got to herd them a little bit, probably all have expertise in the field in which they're helping you, particularly, and even your speakers. You definitely want to curate your speakers' talks and do all that. But besides that, people kind of know what they're doing. When you do this Soul Stories DNA curriculum, what's happening is you're doing all those things too. Your students are organizing the event. Could you close the door? Because I think we're getting a teeny bit of feedback. Okay. Your students are definitely doing all these things. They're going to curate social media. They're going to pick a logo. They're going to call sponsors. They are going to work on tech that day. They're going to do all those things, but the first thing you've got to do during the year is teach them how to do all that stuff. And in addition, they are going to learn to talk about their soul stories and get up on the TED stage, because 35 of those students are going to actually take the TED stage. So in other words, the difference between being an adult TEDx organizer and a Soul Stories DNA student TEDx organizer is you teach them all the skills while you do the same stuff. So what does this look like? If we go to the next slide, at the beginning of the year, your task is twofold as an instructor. You have got to make sure of two things. First of all, you need buy-in. So if your students don't care about TED, none of this is going to happen. So you've got to first steep them in the culture of TED. You've got to show them lots of TED Talks. You've got to make them feel that taking that TED stage and organizing this event all year is worth their while, because it is like akin to getting on stage with, I don't know, who's your favorite musician? Concert.
Beyonce.
Beyonce. You've got to make them think that they're organizing something that would be as cool as organizing a Beyonce concert and getting to go on stage with her, which is not hard because TED is cool. But you've also got to create a classroom in which they feel safe taking the intellectual risks they're going to need to take to accomplish this. So two things that need to, in that classroom needs to be brave, it needs to be kind, it needs to be safe, and you need to be a warm demander. And I'm just going to shout out to the Educators Summit in Philadelphia, because this year I went to Angela Duckworth's conference, and they talked a lot. I know it's an old concept, but they talked a lot about being a warm demander. And a warm demander is a teacher, of course, who holds you to really rigorous standards, but at the end of the day, you know he or she has your back. And you would actually, as a student, doubt that teacher if he or she ceased to hold you to those rigorous demands. And I know they know I'm a demander. I hope they have come to think I'm a warm demander. All right, if we go to the next slide, what I want my students to talk about right now is, since we needed to get them to buy into TED, we needed to show them great TED Talks at the beginning of the curriculum. So they said, yeah, I'm in. So I want them to each talk to you about the first TED Talk when we started this curriculum that really spoke to them.
I saw a TED Talk by Derek Sivers, and it's called How to Start a Movement. And I thought that it was an amazing TED Talk. And it was about, so there were people on a large field, and there was a large crowd. And then one person started dancing to music. And then another person started coming in, and then a bunch of people started joining and dancing. And Derek Sivers asked, who was the leader? Was the leader the person that first started dancing, or was the leader the second person that started dancing, the person that joined in? And this TED Talk really gave me an inspiration to do one TED Talk about myself.
My TED Talk on screen is Diana Nyad's TED Talk, and she's the woman that swam from Cuba to Key West, and she had tried this like 5 or 6 times, and she never gave up, and she was finally successful. So that like inspired a lot of people to do things and never give up.
My favorite TED Talk was by James Veach. He talked about responding to spam email, because I never responded to spam email, and clearly not a lot of people have. And he made it kind of like a joke almost, because he responded to a spam email about gold. And it was funny because they made up a little secret code. So it was one email he got was like, the magic gummy bear is coming to the giant lizard. Like, it was really funny. And it just inspired me to like make a TED Talk, because like that was funny. It was a cool TED Talk, and it made everyone else laugh. So it inspired me to do my own.
And I think what you guys are saying is important, because there are so many different TED Talks. They're really poignant, deep ones. There are really funny, whimsical ones. And you really want to show a whole kind of range of those, so you speak to all your students. If we go to the next slide, one thing we're going to do right now is give you snapshots of the curriculum throughout the year. And we talked a little bit about buy-in in the beginning of the year, and how you have to steep them in this curriculum of TED, but you also have to provide a safe place for your students to feel like they can experience danger safely. So one of the first things I'm doing this year, and granted, just saying this does not make it so, but it's a way of telling your students what your intention is for the year. And so I show them this picture of Bondi Beach in Australia. And Bondi Beach in Australia has that net around it where you can see that it's protecting the swimmers from the sharks, but the swimmers can still swim out there and see the sharks. And I say to my students, I want my classroom to be that sequestered place where you can kind of swim with the sharks, but not really. So take brave risks in here, and hold me accountable as your teacher to keep making that safe, kind place for you to take risks. In addition, I show them a TED Talk about a warm demander, and I say, this is who I aspire to be as your teacher. So Linda Clyott Wayman, How to Fix a Broken School, she was a teacher who took over the Strawberry Mansion School outside of Philadelphia, which was a mess. And she went in there, and she was tough, but she was warm. So when people said to her other admin, we can't fix this because it's unfixable, she had one phrase for them. She said, so what? Now what? Meaning, okay, it's a problem. Now what are we going to do about it? The other thing she said to her students who needed the warmth, she said, if nobody told you they loved you today, I did, and I always will. So again, you can't make your classroom brave and kind and dangerous and all these things just by saying so, but it's a pledge I try to give to my students at the beginning of the year. In the next slide we have, this is another snapshot from, I'm just checking time here, to making sure our classroom is a brave one. You're preparing your students not only to take the TED stage, but to be able to go out and use their voice to do more regular everyday things, like ask for things in the world. And one thing your students are going to have to do is go out and get sponsors for your event. They're going to have to call up places and say, hey, we're running a TEDx. We have out-of-town speakers. This is a hotel. Would you mind giving us a few hotel rooms and we'll put you in our advertising? Nobody wants to do that. That's scary. So the next thing we do is we show them TED Talks that talk all about asking and not fearing rejection. So one of the first ones we look at is Amanda Palmer. She's kind of a punk rock cabaret musician. She herself says her music is not for everyone, but she talks about how she used to be one of those white painted statues in Harvard Square, and how she did this to make money to support her music career, and how it was all an exercise in asking and receiving. When someone gave her money, she would extend out mechanically and give them a flower. and she would look in their eyes and they'd have an interplay of asking and saying thank you. She extended this to her music career. She was the first person who got on Kickstarter and raised $1 million for her album by asking her fan base what they'd like to play, what they'd like to pay. So what she did was not make people pay, she asked. And she extends this in her book, The Art of Asking, to say there is power in asking. The other talk we watch is Jia Zhang. Jia Zhang is a gentleman who wants to be the next Bill Gates, but is also terrified of rejection. So for 100 days, he went out in the world and filmed himself asking for highly improbable things that were probably going to get rejected in order to inure himself to rejection. He asked for a burger refill at McDonald's. He asked to plant a flower in some random person's house, knocking on the door. He learned a few things. If you ask a few questions, you can turn a no into a yes. If you can't turn a no into a yes, it probably doesn't have to do with you that much. And sometimes someone will say no, but say, I know someone who will say yes, and that's called a referral. Once your students watch this, we have them go out into the world and film themselves seeking out a request that has a high probability of rejection. They come back with that film and they do a little talk in class. The next week, we bring in our advancement team and they help them make those calls to the Holiday Inn or the Marriott and say, hey, we need some rooms. Now, when we do that assignment, granted, there's parental approval. We approve the things they do. And any request that they make seeking rejection, the criteria is it has to have an initiative within it that's going to spread kindness in the world. So it's all done very safely. The next slide, which is my favorite, I am wearing my theme costume that apparently I always wear, like this is my version of the Charlie Brown outfit. I was recently at TED Global in Tanzania, like a real TED event, and they gave teachers, they gave audience members an opportunity to come up on the stage and say something about one of the talks. So I got a minute on the TED stage with 11 other people, and I didn't get to practice. It was horrifying. My hand's shaking and my voice is very shrill. But you know what? I had to show that to my students because I had to show them that it's hard for me too, and that I won't make them do anything that I won't try myself. So tell me, and they treated me with probably more compassion than I treat them when I make them get up on the stage.
I thought it was actually really good because she was giving her opinion about the talk, like in general. She responded to it. She said like how she could relate to it, and it was just like it was inspiring, and it was cool to see how she struggles with the same things that we did when we were preparing for the talks.
I didn't really think it was that bad either. I mean, I think she's kind of overreacting, but I think that she did a really good job considering she didn't get to practice or anything. But it was nice to see that she struggles with the same things that we do.
Yeah, and even though she didn't get to practice, I still think you did a very good job. You said that someone was up there watching you, like what's his name?
Person.
Oh yeah, the curator of Chris Anderson was right next to me.
Like that's like amazing that you did so well. Like if I would have done that,
it wasn't that bad. You keep thinking it's so bad, but it wasn't. It was so
like
good.
You made us practice a lot for our TED Talk. But you've never actually made us just go up there and start talking about something, and that would be something way different. And like you did that, and I think that's.
And I don't grade them anywhere. But by the way, they're not in my class, so they don't have to say this. But you know what? It's a very important lesson in teacher empathy. Is being nice now, but they all can tell you anecdotes of when I've been like a bad middle school Bob Fosse, and I'm out there yelling, "Come on, more power, more expression, do this, do that." And it's easy to do it when you haven't tried it yourself. So in fact, another thing I would tell you is find a TEDx event that's not yours somewhere. Take your kids, go out and do a TEDx talk and watch them watch you and feel what it's like before you go and start yelling at them to, come on, what's the problem? Get up on that stage. Okay, another snapshot we want to give you of a lesson we do is forget about putting on the event now. Let's talk about finding our soul stories and how we actually get kids to do their TED Talks. So one of these things is we show them the TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert, which is your elusive creative genius, and how she talks about ideas. And also, I can't recommend enough for people who are struggling with the creative process. Her book, Big Magic, is amazing. But what she talks about is the idea that ideas are out there waiting. You don't go home and say, let me think of a TED Talk. You have to be in that mindful, quiet, brave place where you can see the idea that's waiting for you. The idea is going to wait for you. If you're in the right place, you're going to see it. It's kind of finding your life partner. Only with ideas, you find a number of them over time if you're receptive to them. She actually talks about the poet Ruth Stone, who used to work in the rural fields of Virginia. And she would say that when she was out there, the idea for a poem would come on her like thunder. And all she could do was run like hell to get a pen and paper so that she could write it down. So I wanted Michelle to talk about how we had this experience together when we were trying to find a TED Talk for her, like what her idea was.
The idea was actually always there. We just didn't realize it until for the right moment. After I did my first TED Talk in 7th grade, I wanted to do one in 8th grade too because I thought that it was really cool. And I came into Dr. James's office and we were just thinking about ideas for my next TED Talk. And then we were thinking about like my favorite color, my cat, stuff like that.
And I kept going, right, nah.
And then you go, what about your name, Michelle Pfeiffer? And I was like, yeah, like that's like an amazing idea. And so the idea was pretty much always there. You just have to find it.
And what did you do with the idea that you share a name with an iconic actress? What was your TED Talk about?
It was about finding my own identity. Even though I had the same name as Michelle Pfeiffer, I was still my own self. I wasn't like a replica of the actual Michelle Pfeiffer. I was, if I shared the same name as her, I was my own self, and I was trying to find my own identity.
And I can't recommend all of their talks enough. There's a link at the end of this slideshow. So if anyone wants me to share it with them, I absolutely will, so that you can go and see their talks. The next snapshot we want to look at is what this curriculum does in terms of inclusivity. So one thing we want to do during the year is, well, let me just say, and again, I know Trisha Barvia thinks I'm stalking her now. So lucky there's Twitter, so I don't have to stalk her. But I've just been watching her tweets recently, and this year as a teacher, she is showing the TED Talk, My Year of Reading a Book from Every Country, and that one's by Anne Morgan. And it's an amazing TED Talk about a woman who wanted to read a book from every country. And this was difficult because first of all, you had to figure out all the countries, and then you had to, in some countries, there was not translations. There were not translations of the books. And so she got a whole network of people out there who helped translate books from countries where there were no translations, so she could read a book from every country. And basically her message is so simple, but so visceral and real, that when we tell each other our stories, we stop seeing diversity and we start seeing inclusivity. And this is one thing that happens with the TEDx talks, especially with middle schoolers, when you're dealing with feeling funny about yourself, and it's so hard to have self-compassion. And if you can't have self-compassion, how are you going to have compassion for others? But these kids start bravely telling their stories, and all of a sudden, all that difference melts apart. And I really wanted Crystal to talk about what her talk was about and how it helped her experience inclusivity, and then Sophia as well.
My talk was about identity and how I'm biracial, and no one really knows that, but now they do, because my talk was about how people only ever see me as a white girl with brown hair who is just there, but no one really knows who I really am. And so my talk really focused on how I'm biracial and how people view me as a person compared to view my sister, who is also biracial as well. And I talked about how in Starbucks one day, my sister and I went in and...
Well, explain, because your sister...
Yeah, my sister looks much different than I do. She has...
Much darker skin,
yeah,
right?
She has like a caramel skin undertone, big curly hair. She's really pretty. God bless you.
Thank you.
So I talked about I talked about how in Starbucks one day we went in, we were laughing about something we were talking about, and the barista said to us he thought that we were best friends because we were like laughing on about something. And I said, no, we're sisters. And he kind of like had this look on him. Not that he was being rude, but he just like tilted his head as if it was hard to believe. So I really talked about how under layers and layers and layers are your true self and who you are.
My TED Talk was about an eye condition I have called nystagmus. And a friend of mine, he was also doing a TED Talk about his stuttering. So towards the end of the process, towards the event, we were both talking about, oh, I know your talk, he knew mine. It's like, it's enough about the differences. It's just who we are anymore. So.
Yeah, and that really struck me because they were bored. It wasn't like, oh, I don't want to talk about my nystagmus. I don't want to talk about my stuttering. I know your talk by heart. You know my talk by heart. Nobody cared anymore. We were just all people. And so that was a really important byproduct of all of this. So my next slide is, I'm anticipating what some of you might be thinking, but I can't do this, can I? Yes, you can. So the first thing I want to say is, the one thing I'd say you have to have, so hopefully you do have, is visionary, out-of-the-box leadership at your school. I really need to shout out to our head of school, Bob Goldberg, who is absolutely amazing and visionary and charismatic and wonderful and lets us do all this stuff. And then our head of middle school, Mr. Charles Hagee, who he just says, great idea, run with it. And he's there for us all the time. So you do need leadership in place that wants to support this. But other than that, what I would say is, this is easy to do. This doesn't require a big budget because, first of all, those things that are big budget items, you can get sponsors. Your sponsorship money can't go back to your school. It has to go back into your TED event. But when you go out in the community and say, we want to do a project that privileges the voices of our students and lets them speak on a platform with a bunch of elite adult guest speakers, because we also do bring in adult guest speakers, and that we want to have this amazing community event, camera people will show up. If you have a school, you probably already have a theater. And if you don't, a venue will come to you if you ask the right people. In addition, I would just give you a little bit of advice. Oh, and also I would say mind your connections. You start telling people what you want to do, you're going to be surprised who you find in your community who knows somebody who would want to speak or has connections for, you know, hotel rooms for those out of town guests, all of that stuff. And once you get going, be selective in the adult speakers you bring in. Don't look for big names as much as big ideas, and mind your speeches. You know, focus on your student speeches as well. But when you ask adults to speak, and usually we have 5 or 6 sessions with students doing 4-minute and 30-second speeches and 2 adult speakers. But, you know, curate the speeches. Make sure you work with your adults all year. They will not be insulted. They need to understand. They may be great speakers, but they probably don't know all the elements of TED. You need to give them a time limit. You need to hear that speech, and then you need to see where it goes in line with all your speeches. Also, get in touch with me at soulstoriesdna.com. I'm happy to help. Also, the TEDx community is incredibly, incredibly supportive. Once you hook up with them, they will help you all the time. They're amazing. In fact, I was just at a TEDx qualifying event when I was at TED Global in Tanzania. I met 350 other TEDx organizers, and now I'm on Facebook groups with them, and they help you with everything. Okay, and speaking of them, I wanted to bring up my next slide, which is Elena. She is an amazing TEDx organizer, and if you want to talk to somebody about advice, tweet at her. She does TEDx Sao Paulo. She was one of the training sessions I went to in Tanzania at the TEDx qualifying event. She started with a 200-person event. Next year, she said, I'd like to go to 450 people, and she rented out a venue. And her friend said, Elena, this is $6,000. What if we don't sell it out? And Elena said, well, I can sell my car. And it sold out in a half hour. Next time, she is now, to make a long story short, using a soccer stadium, and her TEDx event is 8,000 people. And what she said was just so simple, but so inspirational. Take a step out in front of you and trust the floor will extend beneath you. That's the paradigm. That's what we want our students to feel as they take a step into fear and risk with this curriculum. And it's what you have to feel as a TEDx organizer and a teacher going forward in this. In my next slide, I want to show you some of the people we got to speak last year. Some of them reached out to us once they knew our event was coming up. Tina Riney, who became an aerialist at the age of 41, was incredible. And she is hugging in that one picture Steve Karras, who lives right down the road from us. And he is a former New York City ballet dancer. And he was George Balanchine's ballet photographer. And then there is John Hockenberry from The Takeaway. And I got him because his wife and I went to school together. And we had a lot of other people. We had Cynthia Lowen, who was the documentarian who made Bully. She just happened to be around here. So you can do it. I would like to go to my next slide, which is the benefits of being a TEDx organizer. So this year I did get to go to TED Global, and TED Global was in Tanzania. I applied as a TEDx organizer. You get a really low rate if they accept you to go. And once you go, you get to see all the TED Talks. And of course, we went to a TEDx training event that qualified me from doing an event of 100 people to an event over 100 people. So this year, our plan at the Benjamin School is to fill our 900-seat Benjamin Hall, sell it out, and we've got an amazing event. I wanted to show you also in that slide, there's a picture of me with all the TEDx organizers outside the theater. We got to go to Arusha National Park. I'm there with a waterfall, and we just learned so much, and it was incredible. So those are some of the things. You get to be part of a great family, and you really learn so much, and you get to go to TED events, which is incredible. I would like to go to our next slide, which is a save the date slide. We will be live streaming. Our next TEDx Benjamin School event is on April 21st, which is a Saturday. If you're in the Palm Beach Gardens area, please come. We'll be selling tickets soon. We're going to have a Guinness World Record broken. We haven't decided on it yet. We have to decide on one. Yeah. We are going to have a flash mob, and we're going to have some amazing speakers. You can follow us on TEDx The Benjamin School or TEDx Benjamin. Some of our speakers on the next slide. We have Ernesto Ciroli, who is a global sustainable development expert who has already given the viral TED Talk, Shut Up and Listen. We have Jamila Liscott, who is a postdoctoral fellow at Columbia. She's also a visiting professor at UMass. She's a spoken word artist, and she is also the TED speaker of 3 Ways to Speak English. She will be here. Carrie Morrison is the president of Live Like Jake, which is a foundation which is local, which tries to support swimming safety for infants. Ms. Morrison lost her son to a drowning accident several years ago, and she has been a boon to this community and helping those tragedies not happen further on down the line. We have Georgia Hurd, the writer and poet and author of Heart Maps. We are thrilled about that. We have Tommy Morrissey, who is a 6-year-old golf prodigy, and he is has one arm. We're very excited to hear from him. Nora Rowley Baskin, the YA author of Ruby on the Outside, will be with us. Andrew Reiner from Towson University. He specializes in finding how we can cultivate our boys to be better men and redefine masculinity. Cornelius Miner will be with us from the Columbia Readers and Writers Project. We're very excited to hear from him. He helps school leaders and leaders to support deep and wide literacy reform. And Glo Robinson, I met this year at the Educators Summit, Dr. Angela Duckworth's conference, and she is a senior, and she was Dr. Duckworth's intern this summer, and she is going to be speaking as well about the emotional toll of standardized testing. So finally, one thing I want to talk about, and then I'm going to let my students close this session out, is if you go to the next slide, David Brooks, and I heard him speak at the Educator Summit this summer as well. He wrote the book, The Road to Character, which is incredible, and he also gave an adjoining TED Talk about if you should concentrate more on your resume virtues or your eulogy virtues. Obviously, the first is those virtues that are going to make you a go-getter in the world. And the latter is those virtues that are going to make you a good person that people are going to speak to when they eulogize you at your life's end. And obviously, we want to cultivate the eulogy virtues more, but I would suggest that doing soul stories and having your kids go through this TEDx curriculum cultivates both their resume virtues and their eulogy virtues. We have one more slide on the end that if you want me to share this with you, it has links to all our talks from the last 2 years and the talks featured here. And we have our hashtag again, but right now I would just like to have my students talk about what they think they finally took from this project at the end. What did it do for you guys?
I think it just made people more aware of diversity, like in our recent, like in more direct community overall, I think, and it showed that like people assuming things of you doesn't mean they're entitled to be rude, but they're just trying to get a better picture of what's going on.
For my talk, not only has it raised awareness for like visual impairment and stuff, I actually started a nonprofit foundation called iRide, because most of the people with my eye condition don't have good enough vision to drive. So my foundation is raising funds to help people with visual impairment that can't drive pay for public transportation like buses and taxis.
Before I say anything, please tweet out to us the Ed Collab Gathering #4. I think that these TED Talks have helped me a lot with public speaking. After I did my first TED Talk, seeing how I did better on my second one, I see like the process of how well I've done, and just like in school in general, when people ask you to speak, I just felt like I became a lot better in public speaking, and I recommend you guys to do TED Talks too.
And I would augment what you say, Michelle, that she's my only student who did one in 7th grade and did one in 8th grade. And we really want to look at this curriculum going forward in terms of
with colleges, like
go ahead.
Like say that you start doing one and then you do one all of these years at school, you see the difference. And if you apply for a college, they will look, it's not just like an essay, it's more than an essay. They will see the process of how well you've done from the beginning to the end, and it will just look like really well in a college resume. And yeah.
I don't know if we have any time left, but I guess we have 2 minutes. Our hashtag is the Ed Collab Gathering #4. If anybody has a question for the students. I gave her a job, and boy, does she do it. Anybody?
Is it gonna come up there? Or?
Really?
I don't know.
Check your phone.
Yeah, like maybe.
Oh, I don't know. Well, we're pretty much out of time. We kind of came out perfectly. We are so grateful for the opportunity to be here today, and I'm so grateful for my students to have this opportunity because, again, it's one of those out-of-the-box learning experiences where now on their resume they don't just have a TED Talk. They've presented at a educational conference, and for that we are very grateful, and I'm very grateful to have students who have such equanimity and presence and skills of oratory that they can do that. So thank you again, and we're ready to enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Cristina. Girls, that was really inspiring session today. I'm sure lots of educators around the world are having many ideas and thinking about in introducing soul stories in their curriculum, in their classrooms. So yes, we can definitely reach out. Here's Cristina's information and the TED Talks that the girls presented again. So do reach out to Cristina at her email and check out the girls. Girls, do you want to say one? Do you just want to quickly give us your names again and your TED Talk quickly?
I'm Michelle Pfeiffer. Names of our TED, like what we did.
Yes.
I did one about being trilingual and languages, and I did another one about my name being Michelle Pfeiffer.
And it's called The Other Michelle Pfeiffer.
Michelle Pfeiffer.
My name is Sophia Lipris. My TED Talk was about nystagmus and the power of asking, and my TED Talk was called Couldn't Ask for More.
My name's Crystal Paldo, and my TED Talk is called Identity.
Was it exploring identity?
I don't know.
Something with an ending.
And again, we'd be happy to send you all the links as well.
So thank you so much, girls. I am completely blown away. Cristina, you for taking on the challenge and bringing something that will be a lifelong skill for these girls in the classroom, and girls for, standing in front of an audience that is, the whole world, and presenting your identities and your special talents. It's truly an inspiration. For the rest of you, if you want to keep being inspired, do stay with us. We have lots of great sessions coming up. I'm just sharing with you in our next session coming up, we have Jillian and Teresa talking about race in the classroom. That's workshop number 5. Workshop number 6 is by Maggie Roberts, talking about exploring the art of great teaching. And then we have Stephanie, Heidi, Kathy, and Susan talking about building your PLN, session number 7. So do stay with us and continue with our free learning day in our next upcoming workshops. That's it from us for this workshop. Thank you to Cristina. Thank you, girls. And we will be signing off.
Thank you.
Thank you.